Here we are again. It is feeling a little deja vu-esque to say that we're at an important date for remote ID in the US, but following the previous decision from the FAA to essentially delay the enforcement of remote ID, as they explain due to the lack of available modules, Saturday the 16th of March 2024 is the new go date in terms of enforcement. That word sounds a little bit scary, enforcement, but it doesn't have to be. The FAA have remained consistent that they intend to maintain their existing enforcement policy of educate first and fine only when necessary. We have an interview clip coming up with Kevin Morris of the FAA shortly, but as a further update, in a recent committee meeting, the FAA again confirmed that remote ID enforcement would be focused on blatant and consistent non-compliance, with the message of support to those trying to comply. Just before the original remote ID launch date back in September 2023, we sat down with Kevin Morris of the FAA to ask him how the FAA will be enforcing remote ID on the ground and policy-wise. This is the first time we've played out this clip in full because we decided to hold off after the FAA deferred their main enforcement to this year. Let's take a listen to the enforcement policy in the FAA's own words. A key part of remote ID is, of course, enforcement, of course. So the next couple of questions will surround that. Does the FAA have an enforcement policy as such that you can discuss in terms of remote ID?
And when we rolled out Trust, the recreational UAS safety test, to get people to take that and to try to get them in compliance, obviously there's a ramp-up period. The FAA has had a long-standing policy called its compliance policy. And that's really our first step in our broader enforcement program. So what I mean by compliance policy is we don't necessarily come out with fines right out of the gate if they're not warranted. It's one of those things where a lot of people, I'll use Trust as an example again here, didn't know that they needed to take Trust. It was a brand new program. It was buried in a reauthorization act, so a lot of people don't read those. So there was this requirement that came out that not a lot of people were aware of. But the deadline didn't change. You still needed to take this recreational UAS safety test before you flew your drone recreationally. Now, if an FAA inspector was out in the field and they saw somebody and I don't know what the Trust is, I don't know what you're talking about, that inspector can follow our compliance policy and say, hey, look, this is what it is. I'll show you. Here's the link. Here's what you need to know. Make sure you take this before you fly next time. That is a completely appropriate step in our enforcement program to ensure compliance, which is educate. There's also counseling. There's also some remedial training. So we have in the FAA, we have a lot of tools at our inspectors' discretion to ensure compliance that don't involve either taking your remote pilot certificate away or issuing you a multi-$1,000 fine. There's a lot of steps before that. We still have that ability, but we tend to try to do the educate, counsel, train first before we get to the fine. Because if you can educate and train someone, you'll have a long-lasting compliance attitude versus you didn't do it, here's a fine. And now the person just hates the FAA even more because we fine them and they still don't know really what they were supposed to do because we didn't explain it to them. So it's more of our compliance policy that's going to be in effect probably for this first, whatever, a week, few months. I don't know the time frame here. Well, everybody gets ramped up with remote ID where most people may not be aware or they think they have remote ID. I put a broadcast module on. Well, did you add it to your drone's registration? Oh, well, I didn't know I needed to do that. Okay, well, yeah, sure. Here's how you do it. You can go into Drone Zone, and we help them through that process.
FAA regulations, you were talking about field inspectors being out in the field, etc., are of course not enforced by local police departments in the same way that things like criminal offences, etc. Are you expecting? Have you worked on liaising with local authorities or any kind of regional law enforcement in terms of any kind of support level that you're expecting from them?
Well, so we work continuously with our security partners, which include local law enforcement, police officers. We have a whole program dedicated to assist and support them, call it our Law Enforcement Assistance Program. And because we like abbreviations in the FAA, we call that LEAP, L-E-A-P. So our LEAP program is designed specifically for law enforcement personnel to assist and educate them on all things aviation, not just drone, but all things aviation. Now, certainly drones are something that they probably will be involved with more than traditional aviation, just because the proclivity of drones to be just about anywhere is an airport for a drone, really. So we work with them a lot and helping them not only understand what's coming up with remote ID, but to help them understand just some of the basics, registration, the trust completion certificate, things that they may need to or have the authority to ask for as a police officer or law enforcement officer, and that the drone pilot must show to them by rule. Now, the reality is going to be we don't have inspectors standing on every street corner. We don't have inspectors standing in every park. We don't have enough inspectors to cover every drone potential location everywhere across the U.S. And that goes the same with law enforcement, is we can all probably test. They have a very difficult job. And a lot of times somebody flying a drone probably isn't at the top of their priority list for that day's duty register. So most of the time when a police officer gets involved with the drone, it's because someone has called or reported a suspicious something or other, or somebody doing something a bit foolish with the drone. So the law enforcement officer responds to that. They certainly have their laws that they're working with, trespass, privacy, things of those nature. What we do with our LEAP program is we help them understand, hey, if you went out on a call and you're investigating a drone, here's what we need, because we're going to do our piece of the investigation too. So if a drone was flying really, really high, or it was flying really close to an airport, there are obviously certain things that the FAA is going to be concerned with that we want to take a look at. So our LEAP, our law enforcement assistance program, helps those officers not only to investigate and give them the knowledge to do their job, but to help them understand what we need at the FAA to follow up on the other side to say, was this person authorized? Did they have an airspace authorization? Was it registered? All those things that we know we need to do before we fly a drone.
So there we have it. Although remote ID now enters a new phase where US drone flyers will certainly be expected to make every effort to comply, the FAA are not seeking to smash the hobby with a hammer and give zero tolerance. The FAA enforcement policy remains one of education first, and you should expect that approach to continue. We've linked the policy document in the description below should you wish to take a deeper dive. There will be growing pains while the hobby gets used to this change, and for self-build FPV in particular. The process will bring about more complexity. We will keep you fully informed of developments on remote ID on both sides of the Atlantic, with the UK now well into discussions and decisions regarding our own version of remote ID. So if you're new here, hit the subscribe button to get more updates. If you're one of our awesome regulars still watching the video at this point, you are awesome, and please would you mind hitting the like button? It makes me smile. Sean out.